Hi everybody. In this episode of Ask David, we're talking about how to use a chipped M42 to your modern mount adapter so you have access to inexpensive manual focus M42 lenses so you can ramp up your lens supply quickly and cheaply. For today's question, how do I use a chipped M42 to Sony Alpha mount adapter for using M42 lenses on my Sony Alpha camera? Well, there's a few different lens mounts this work with. If you have a Sony Alpha mount, if you have a Canon EOS EF or EFS mount camera, there are chipped versions of M42 adapters. There are some other mounts out there, but I have the EOS mount right here, and I've used the Sony one as well. So there are two main types of M42 adapters. There's ones with a chip, and then there's ones without. The ones without we can call dumb adapters. If you're using a camera system that has an electronic interface as a primary means of operation, such as the Sony Alpha bodies or the Canon EF mount bodies, the Minolta Alpha bodies, the same thing applies for. I strongly recommend not getting a dumb adapter, but spending the extra $3 to $10 and getting a chipped adapter. What the chipped adapter does is it tells your camera, hey, this is a 50mm 1.7 in the case of Sony, or 50mm 1.8 in the case of the Alpha mount adapter. And so your camera will always think, no matter what you're doing, that it's shooting at f1.8, at wide open. The advantage of that is that you can stop down your M42 lens and get an accurate meter reading in aperture priority or program mode all the time. Let me show you how that works. This is a Takumar 105mm f2.8 M42 mount lens. It is a fantastic portrait lens. I think it's one of the two best portrait lenses I've ever used. So I like to use it on my Minolta Alpha 9, and I like to use it on my Canon EOS 3. I have a Canon EF chipped adapter here. I'm going to put it into my EOS 3. Tightening the Takumar lens also clicks the adapter into place. It's important to click the adapter into place so that the chip lines up correctly with the contacts. Now, the camera thinks that it's got a 50mm f1.8 lens that is wide open on it. So it believes right now that the light that's coming through it is f1.4 light. So it will always believe that, and that's what you want. So you put your camera into aperture priority mode, or program, preferably aperture priority, which it is, and you set your lens to M. You might not be able to see it, but old M42 lenses, most of them have an M or an A switch. The A switch was for the M42 camera so that a paddle would flap upward inside the lens mount and stop down the lens before the shot was taken. In M mode, the aperture is always stopped down. So you might be able to see this. As I stop down the lens, you might be able to see, maybe not, that the aperture is actually stopping down as well. So if I take a meter reading, I have 100 ISO film in the camera right now at f1.4, pointing it just at my wall. The camera says I need a 40th of a second exposure, which aligns with a meter reading that I'd already taken. So now if I stop down my lens to, let's say f5.6, well, I should have a slower shutter speed. It should be 1/80th at f4. I'm sorry, it should be 1/20th at f4, 1/10th at f5.6, or thereabouts. Let's find out. It says 1/8th at f5.6, which is well within the film's latitude, so that's just fine. What about f16? Now, going down to f8, that should be 1/4 of a second, a half a second at f11, and a full second at f16. And it says a little bit more than a second. Again, well within the film's exposure latitude. If you want to have a very precise exposure, however, as you stop down the lens, your camera will have a slightly harder time getting a proper exposure because there's less light coming through the lens, and meters are less efficient when they have less light. So if you want to make sure that you have the exact proper exposure and not be off a little bit, not be overexposing slightly, one thing you can do is some exposure compensation. So At f16, I should have had a 1 second exposure with this, and I was getting something that's a little bit closer to 1.5, 1 3/4. So if I go in and I adjust my exposure compensation to remove half of a stop, that'll get me closer to that 1 second. You only need to do that when you stop down past f11. Up until that point, the meter readings are pretty accurate because these cameras have the ability to accurately meter up to at least f8, which is typically, for most manufacturers, the slowest basic lens aperture that is in their lineup. The process is the same whether you're using it for Canon EF or Minolta Alpha. So the real advantage of having a chipped adapter is that the old M42 lenses, many of which are still really, really good performers and built very well, can deliver really nice photos, digital or film. If you don't want to spend $800 on a brand new L-series portrait lens, I picked up this 105 for $35. Or if you don't want to get go onto your Sony Alpha and spend tons and tons of money getting a 135 STF or other really nice lens like that, there are really good 135s that can be had in M42 for $10. So a chipped adapter will give you an opportunity to build up a quick stockpile of lenses that you can use while you work on getting the native mount lenses. Chipped adapters, they're pretty fantastic.